in Unreal Engine 5. Clouds, their volumes, living, breathing data. VDBs let you sculpt clouds with depth, light, and density. With the new update, you can process these in real time. Instead of paying a fortune for these plugins, I'll teach you how to do it yourself. Let's break it down. VDBs hold
voxel data. Think of them like textures, but unlike textures, they're stored in a 3D matrix instead of 2D. Now in this video, we're not going to talk about how to make VDBs, but how to use them with Unreal Engine's Heterogeneous Volumes. Make sure to continuously refer to this document on Heterogeneous Volumes by Epic Games. First, we're going to cover how to make these clouds in the editor, and then we're going to show you how to do it in C++. Now, most of these plugins and tools online use a variation of Unreal Engine's sparse volume material. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this engine material and we're going to clone it and make our own version. Now, if you don't see it in the editor, you need to go to settings and enable show engine content. Make sure you create a material instance from this material so we can dynamically change the cloud however we want. So if you double click on the original material, you'll see the attributes. And if you go here to local position, you'll see that it's deprecated. So delete that and create a new local position and then plug that into the subtraction node. So this should be now the most efficient SVT material we can have because it's from Epic Games themselves. Now, before we actually get our VDB and convert it to a sparse volume texture, you'll see that the sparse volume texture actually has two attributes. So VDBs usually have a temperature attribute and a density attribute. So what Epic Games is doing here is they're taking the attributes out of it and they're using a density mask on the attribute. The SVTs give attributes out in the RGBA channels. So we're using just the mask to say we only want the R channel, which contains the density value, and we just use that. And then we're clamping it between a specific value, and then we're plugging that into the extinction node for the material. So you can see here like the density. This is what's really going to be important for creating the look of our specific clouds. And in the instance material, you can change this however you would like. So if you have your own custom VDB already, like you've created maybe in Blender or Houdini, you can plug it in right here. But you can get some VDBs from Unreal Engine themselves, and I've experimented with a few, and honestly these are super efficient and they cost a lot less in terms of performance. Now we get to the juicy bit, Heterogeneous Volumes. Just a quick heads up, so this tutorial is about Heterogeneous Volumes and VDBs at runtime, not for cinematics or path tracing. So most people online will tell you to just add a new scene component and add a heterogeneous volume, but we're gonna do it a different way. We're gonna add a component to our actor, and from there we can customize it better. So grab the cloud actor we just made and drag it into the world. Then we're gonna click on the heterogeneous component that we attached to our actor. And we're gonna set the material to the material that we created previously. Now you should be able to see your cloud. Don't worry if your cloud doesn't look exactly like mine. There's a few things that we still need to do. First, go into the instance material and let's change some of the settings. We want to change density and we also want to change the albedo color. Set the albedo strength to full so we know that the color is 100% affecting the cloud. Now, if the color is not 100% affecting the cloud yet, we still have things to change in the direct lighting settings and the console variables. So I'm going to show you the console variables that I've used, but I'm not going to go through each of them individually because it's going to take too long. If you want to know what each means, you can copy paste it into ChatGPT and get a full breakdown. So make sure you're in your main directory and then go to the config folder. In the config folder, we want to open the engine config file. Here are all the config variables that I've altered. I'm going to paste them into the description. You can copy paste them as you like. Just make sure you have the most important ones there. Shadow jitter, indirect lighting, and max trace distance. These are all super important. If you're getting weird performance issues, you can bring the trace distance down so it won't render clouds that are too far away. This one is up to you and your system. This part is extremely important because heterogeneous volumes are an experimental feature in Unreal. When you use multiple of them, it throws a lot of issues, such as the shadows flickering and insane performance drops. So we're going to cover how to do shadows properly, but I've tinkered with a lot of these settings and this is the most important ones. And these really work really well and I get amazing performance. So now onto heterogeneous volumes attributes. Here we're using a cloud that I already created, but we're going to see the attributes and how they affect that cloud. So in terms of lighting downsampling factor, if you put it below 2, your computer is going to lag and you don't really see that much of a difference. So the higher that this is, the lower resolution you're going to have, and the lower that this is, the better resolution you're going to have. And you can see from the frames per second here the difference between shadow factor of 2 and a much higher version. So you don't want to mess with the volume resolution, but just make sure that gravity is off, collision's off, and all these physics things are off and overlapping's off, because we want the best performance possible out of these clouds. So now that it's set up, it should look something like this. And as you can see, I'm getting over 60 FPS. Now, if it doesn't look exactly the same, that's because we still have the lighting to set up. So your clouds could be a bit more gray or a different or weird color because we need to set up the actual direct lighting and how it affects the clouds. So another question you're going to ask is, where are the shadows? So we have to change a few things in the directional light, and I need to explain to you how it works and how it affects volume materials. Now, if you're using multiple VDBs in one scene and they overlap each other, Unreal doesn't know how to handle this, especially when you have shadows turned on. So I'm going to show you what it looks like with shadows, but ideally we're going to want to fake the shadows later on, and we will actually turn these shadows off. So go into your directional light and then search for volume, and then turn on cast volumetric shadows. Now you should see it cast shadows onto the ground and within itself. On mine, it's a bit bugged and the shadows are not showing on the ground. But you can see the performance, there's a big performance dip, and also the look of the cloud is a lot better. Now we can slightly adjust the look of this by going back into our heterogeneous components and changing the bias factor and the shadow step factor. Also, another thing that we need to do is the volumetric scattering. Now this will actually tell the albedo color how to affect the cloud. So if your clouds look too gray, maybe it's because you need to change the volumetric scattering, and that will let the color diffuse more or scatter more into the cloud. Now there's another issue where the ground is reflecting into the cloud, which we don't want because I don't want my cloud to look green. No. So this will get rid of the annoying reflection issues. So we're going to put our ground on lighting channel 0 and our directional light on 1 and 0. Then we're going to put our cloud to be on 1. So the lighting channel that affects the cloud is only lighting channel 1, which is the directional light. There's nothing else in that channel. In this chapter, we're going to talk about the problem with clouds. Now, the biggest problem with this is when we have multiple of them, especially at runtime, and we ask them to cast a shadow, 1, we lose an insane amount of performance, and 2, it actually gets very buggy. Some of the shadows glitch, some flicker, some don't even show. So there's a few things that we're going to do as a solution. 1 is using a light function material, and 2 is faking the shadow by adding a hidden material underneath the cloud. So go to directional light, and in directional light, scroll down and you will find a material. Here you can add your light function material, which simulates shadows onto the ground. So now we're going to discuss the material that we're going to use to replicate a shadow and attach it to the bottom of our cloud. This is because I don't want a volumetric cloud to cast shadows onto the environment. It doesn't work. So we're going to fake it with a solid material. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like really quickly, and you can see it looks pretty nice. It looks very cloudy. So I'm now going to talk about the material itself. So here we just have some math calculations, and then we have essentially a panner that just pans and moves it very slowly to emulate that of a cloud. I'll provide the material and the texture in the description below. Now to actually put this on our cloud actor. So open up the cloud blueprint and then and for visual purpose, we will just add our material of our cloud in our heterogeneous component. Okay, so now that we can see the cloud, we can move it up a little bit, and we can place a solid plane underneath it. So we're going to add a static mesh component, and in this static mesh component, we're going to look for plane. Now there's different planes, but what we want is just plane and static mesh. So let's scale that up. And now that it's scaled up, we can apply the material that we've just created to cast a shadow onto the ground. But there's one thing, you can still see it. So this checkbox, or hidden shadow, essentially hides the mesh, but still keeps the shadow on the ground. So as you can see here, the plane is visible in the editor, but as soon as I play, it disappears, but the shadow stays. So let's say we're finally there, we've done everything, but the shadows from the clouds look completely trash. Well, there's a few things that we need to do to make the shadows a bit smoother and blend with the environment more. Firstly, we gotta turn on ray trace shadows. This may affect performance slightly, but it's not as bad as volumetric shadows. Then you want to come down here to shadow source angle factor and bump it up. This smooths out the shadows and blends it in with the environment more. Wow, so we're finally done.
Your clouds should look a little something like this. In the next episode we go deeper. Procedural generation, object pooling, and C++ at the core. This is the think and worlds that build themselves. Stay tuned.